You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Hello and welcome again to the Dead Reckoning podcast. I'm your host, as always, Larry Leese. Today we're diving into Project Stargate. Before we do that, give us your thoughts on the topics we cover in the comment section below. And of course, if there's another topic you want covered, let me know as well in the comment section. And with that, let's dive right into today's episode. Imagine a top secret US military program where government agents sit in dark rooms, close their eyes, and attempt to psychically spy on Soviet missile bases from across the world. No, this isn't the plot of a forgotten 90s sci fi show or an X-Files spinoff. This was real. Funded by the CIA and the DIA, backed by senators, and sustained for over 2 decades, Project Stargate was America's official attempt to weaponize psychic powers. The goal? Use remote viewing, a kind of mental GPS powered by meditation, intuition, and a sprinkle of wishful thinking. To gather intelligence, that is. The result? Well, let's just say it involves ghostwriting spirits named Maurice, telepathy arms race with the Soviet Union, and one very confused general chained in a Red Brigade's apartment. This is the strange, true story of how U.S. intelligence spent $22 million trying to read minds, fight communism, and maybe, just maybe, see through walls. It's the winter of 1982. NATO is in turmoil. One of their top officers in Europe, U.S. General James Dozier, has been kidnapped by a cell of Marxist terrorists in northern Italy, the Red Brigades, infamous for executing their captives. Excuse me. Just before we continue with today's episode, I do want to share with you a message from our fantastic sponsor today, and that, of course, is NordVPN. If you're looking to surf the internet with a peace of mind that you can only get from a VPN, then you need to check out NordVPN today. 72% off and 3 free months. Also, with NordVPN, you can get access to hidden content from all streaming platforms like Netflix. You just, with the press of a button, you change your location and bam, you can get Netflix in Britain right at your home in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's that easy. So check them out today. Use the link in the description. And with that, let's get back to the rest of the episode. The Italian police do what the police do. They round up suspects, kick down doors, bust terror cells, and confiscate military-grade arsenals. Allegedly, they also conduct some intense interviews using water-based adult interrogation techniques. But the DIA, America's Defense Intelligence Agency, is not sitting idle either. Unable to conduct investigations on the ground, they've deployed one of their best assets, an operative, who will be able to locate where the general is kept hidden without leaving U.S. soil. His name is Joe McConnell, an agent and psychic expert in remote viewing. This totally sounds like an intro to a cheesy 90s TV show. Following an established procedure, the agent practices meditation to remove any blockages which may hamper his mental conduits. Then a colleague, acting as a monitor, provides information and documentation related to the target, in this case, the general. The information provided evokes a signal line which strikes at a cognition within the psychic's autonomic nervous system. Impressions, perceptions, images start forming within the remote viewer's mind. A coastline appears, as seen from above, as if hovering thousands of miles away from his body. The agent closes in on the coast and then moves inland, identifying the area as northeastern Italy. And in his own words, he said, quote, "I moved closer to the ground and began to pick out roadways and buildings. I followed the roads and eventually found myself near a small central plaza, across from some kind of fountain, and picked up the smells of a butcher's shop. I got an image of a very large apartment building and settled in on the second floor." Was Joe able to find the general in time with his remote abilities? Who won, eventually? Who won this duel between extrasensory perception and the harsh materialism of Marxist-Leninist armed insurgents? excuse me, longtime fans, excuse me, of the Cold War should know how this story ends. But for the time being, I want to shift our attention to the project under which McGonnell was recruited and trained. It may sound like a Stranger Things pitch by a Netflix screenwriter, but for more than 2 decades, CIA and DIA dedicated $22 million in funding to the research of remote viewing and other extrasensory capabilities, as well as their application to intelligence gathering. Tell you what, that's probably like 150 million or something in today's money. Maybe not 150, maybe like 100 million in today's money. I could think of a lot of better things to do with 100 million. You could probably buy at least one F-16 or F-22 or something cool with that, right? Something actually useful rather than just having people sit in rooms and imagine. Obviously, I'm a little bit of a skeptic. So let's see how this works out, shall we? Before we dismiss the premise altogether, according to reputable news outlets, operatives within this program scored some notable victories. And even a professor of statistics had to concede that the psychics hired by the DIA and CIA achieved results, quote, far beyond what is expected by chance. The program known today as Stargate was the last incarnation of a series of remote viewing programs conducted by the CIA and the DIA between 1970 and 1995. It's kind of crazy to think they were working on this in the 95. I was like 6 years old, I think, at the time. So it's kind of crazy that they were still doing it because it seems like something they'd end in like the 80s or late 70s. The first efforts in the field were initiated by the CIA in reaction to the concern that Soviet secret services may be conducting psychotronic research. The CIA concluded that by 1970, the Soviets were spending 6 million rubles per year on psychic phenomena, with the budget predicted to increase fivefold by 1975. This sounds like exactly the sort of thing if I'm running the Soviet Union, I'm like, yeah, let's just plant some information about some crazy projects. What are you working on? Remote viewing. What are you working on? Time travel. What are you working on? Nuclear fusion. This is back in the day. Just be like, yeah, just say we're working on these crazy things just so that the CIA and the DIA would go waste tons of money on them, even though we're doing no such thing. The Cold War was essentially an appendage measuring deal in which the two opposing blocs constantly tried to outdo each other at the expense of humankind. Thus, in 1970, the CIA secured funding for its first research program in this field called SCANATE, or SCANATE. SCANATE. Apologies for butchering the name. It took 2 years, however, before research on remote viewing was initiated at the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. Let us take a moment to clarify exactly what remote viewing is and how it worked. The journal Strategic Analysis describes it as, quote, the ability of human beings to perceive information and imagery of remote geographical targets. I mean, I can do that. I can perceive imagery of remote geographical targets. I'm thinking of Bin Laden's face right now, perceiving that foreign remote target. But that's obviously not what we're going after here, is it? The ability was conducted by applying three main techniques. One, coordinate remote viewing. This was the original method developed by SRI in Menlo Park. Remote viewers were asked to describe, write down, or sketch out what they could see or perceive at specific geographic coordinates. Number two, extended remote viewing. This method was based on relaxation and meditation, allowing viewers to tap into psychic perception without the need of coordinates. And three, written remote viewing, a technique similar to automatic writing used by spiritual mediums. Excuse me. I've searched the CIA archives for descriptions of how these techniques could work out and found a detailed set of instructions for CRV, the technique based on coordinates. The document dated July 1988 described CRV as a technique that can be taught to anyone, even without innate psychic abilities, with a 6-stage training program. The unnamed author admits that not all about the CRV process is clear. He says, quote, many theory questions remain unanswered, but enthusiastically concludes, the fact is, the stuff works. So let's see how. Our unconscious mind supposedly contains a structure known as the matrix, described as all knowing and omnipotent. The matrix contains elements called patterns, also referred to as thought balls. I mean, the brain's enormously complex and we still don't understand it, but how about we just assume that something's not there until we can prove that it is, or like have any evidence at all that it is, rather than just be like, maybe there's some thought balls in there. It's ridiculous. Each pattern radiates its own energy in the form of a signal line, which causes cognitrons to resonate. But now you might think, what is a cognitron? I found references to this concept in a 1975 issue of the journal Biological Cybernetics, as well as a 1964 report by the U.S. Defense Technical Information Center. In both cases, cognitrons are defined as nets of artificial neurons in the context of research on artificial intelligence. Well, those sound real. Sounds like actual cybernetic science. The unnamed CIA author, however, seems to ignore the fact and assume that they're actual neural networks within our mind. More precisely, inside the autonomic nervous system. When a signal line has a cognition, it resonates, thus producing perceptual feedback. So during a CRV session, a monitor will read a set of coordinates to a remote viewer. These coordinates will evoke, quote, the signal line corresponding to the pattern within the matrix at that set of coordinates. The signal line then hits the cognitron, generating, and I quote again, impressions or perceptions of the target area keyed to the specific issues he is concerned with. For example, structure, terrain, emotions, etc. Sounds like some guy read some science from a journal that he didn't really understand and was like, yeah, okay, cool. Let's put this into practice for psychics and sell it to the CIA for 100 million. Governments have too much money. The explanation, therefore, implies the matrix within our subconscious already contains all the information and knowledge available in the entire universe. Clearly, it doesn't. The main purpose of the training program is to unlock the free flow of information as it leaves the unconscious mind and crosses the border with the conscious mind. This information travels via conduits or channels, which are normally blocked by inhibitors or physical inclemencies. For example, sickness, fatigue, hunger, or even the simple act of moving about. I'll tell you what, if I'm not sick, I'm not hungry, I'm not tired, and I'm sitting still, it's not like, oh, suddenly I know next week's lottery numbers. Suddenly I understand all the complex science. It's like, no, my brain is far too small for that. I don't have that information locked in my brain. Have you seen how tiny it is? Come on. The author advises that for the viewer to be effective, these inclemencies should be removed. Thus, the viewer should not view when they are sick, fatigued, hungry, or in motion. Bring me another snack, CIA man. I'd like a bagel now before I completely fry. Okay, now I love a bagel right now for some reason. It's just the first thing that came to mind. The research kicked off in 1972 at SRI and was led by physicist and parapsychologist Russell Targ, as well as engineer and parapsychologist Harold Puthoff. The latter had previously worked with the NSA and was alleged to have ties with Scientology. The two targeted promising agents among gifted individuals such as artist and psychic Ingo Swann. The remote viewing capabilities of the subjects were tested to ensure that they achieve a minimum accuracy rate of 65%. In parallel to the CIA-sponsored SRI research, the DIA Army Intelligence launched their own psychic program under the supervision of the Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence Systems Exploitation Detachment. That's a hell of a job title, isn't it? The Army initiative, dubbed Gondola Wish, was launched in 1977 and was focused on evaluating how Cold War adversaries, may be potentially using remote viewing. In 1978, Gondola Wish became Girl Flame, an operational collection effort. In other words, using psychic abilities to gather intelligence on the location of enemy installations or the whereabouts of friends and foes alike. Girl Flame was headquartered at buildings 2560 and 2561 at Fort Meade, Maryland. Described by Army.mil as, quote, the nation's premier platform for intelligence, information, and cyber operations. Isn't that, there's that, what is it, fascinating thing going on right now? Where is it? Like, uh, Molly keeps getting all the mail for the military because their domain extension, instead of being .mil for the military, it's .ml, like .ml without the I, which you could think also could be for the military, right? So people are sending like random documents to, like, let's say John at army.ml, except it's going to John at army.molly. And it's getting sent to like the generic inbox for the entire country. And I don't think Molly and America are friends. I mean, I don't know anything about Molly. Anyway, Fort Meade was described by Army.mil as the nation's premier platform for intelligence, information, and cyber operations. Flame was also known, uh, also internally known as Detachment G of INSCOM, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command. It was manned by soldiers and a few civilians believed to be gifted with natural psychic abilities. Then in early 1979, the SRI program was integrated into Grill Flame. Four years later, the naming department at DIA decided it was time for a change, and the program was renamed as INSCOM Center Lane Project, or ICLP. Harold Putoff, one of the initial researchers at Stanford Research Institute, still called the shots, and his recruit, Ingo Swann, devised a training program which, in theory, could allow even non gifted individuals to become proficient remote viewers. And I do apologize for butchering these guys' names. ICLP was a highly classified program, but an internal leak allowed journalist Jack Anderson to first report about it in April 1984. I hope the title was CIA Wasting Tons of Money. In the same year, perhaps as a response to added scrutiny, the Army Research Institute, or ARI, commissioned the National Research Council of the National Academy of Sciences to assess the effectiveness of remote viewing practices, as well as the results of research trials conducted by the SRI. The review panel was led by David Gosselin, Executive Director of the Commission on Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education. Gosselin and his colleagues published the report titled Enhancing Human Performance Issues, Theories, and Techniques. And that was in 1988. So, what was the verdict of the ARI? In short, they found little to no support for the usefulness of remote viewing. Well, there you go. Case closed, right? I'd hope so, but we're only about a third of the way through this episode, so clearly we're not. Despite the damning report, research and operational activities under the ICLP umbrella continued throughout the 80s and 90s. This happened largely thanks to the support of Democratic Senators Claiborne Pell and Charles Rose. Pell, in particular, was known for his interest in the paranormal, and both were convinced of Center Lane's effectiveness. Well, how about instead of letting the politicians decide whether something's effective or not, we let the scientists at the Research Institute decide whether something's effective? That would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it? But here we are. Nonetheless, in 1985, centralized Army funding was withdrawn. But the DIA's Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate found some spare cash under the couch and were happy to pay the bills. And of course, they slapped another label on the program, Sunstreak. Seriously, why so many freaking name changes? And continued to flare up cognitrons until 1991. That's when the initiative received its most iconic moniker, Stargate. It was contracted to Science Application International Corporation, or SAIC. According to the SAIC corporate website, it was, quote, a premier Fortune 500 technology integrator driving our nation's digital transformation. Their list of clients include the Department of Defense, the U.S. intelligence community, other federal civilian agencies, health services, and the U.S. Space Force. The work conducted by SAIC was overseen by parapsychologist Edwin May, who acted both as principal investigator and judge for the remote viewing experiments under Stargate. Well, how about the guy who's running it? We don't let him judge whether they're successful. How about we have an outside body decide that? Maybe that would be good, especially with something absolutely ludicrous as this. The government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on what the fuck? By the early 90s, the program was afflicted by poor morale, bickering at the top levels, and poor performance. In 1995, the Defense Appropriations Bill decreed for Stargate to be handed over to the CIA, where it all started. As soon as this hot potato landed in the CIA's lap, the agency contracted the American Institute for Research to conduct a retrospective assessment on the effectiveness of Stargate remote viewers. Excuse me. Or in detail, they were to evaluate the success rates of the trials conducted by Edwin May at SAIC. AIR asked two academics to prepare two independent points of view. One was Dr. Jessica Utz, a professor of statistics at the University of California in Davis, Dr. Raymond Hyman, a professor of psychology at the University of Oregon. Their evaluations were, I must say, rather surprising and diametrically opposed. We're going to explore them in the next segment, but for the moment, I will just report that the final recommendation by AIR, was to shut down the Stargate and throw away the key. Thus, at the end of 1995, 25-year effort to use remote viewing for intelligence gathering work was terminated. As mentioned earlier, the overall budget of Stargate and its predecessors had totaled $22 million as of 1995 value. Adjusted for inflation, that's more than $44 million in today's value. An expense of roughly $1.76 million per year of the program, which now doesn't sound so bad. I mean, I thought that was like 1980s dollars, the 22 million or whatever, but it's 95, which apparently has only doubled. I mean, lost half of its value, which is crazy, but half as expensive as it was in 95, or twice as expensive because of inflation. Sure, those are drops in the ocean that's worth 1.7 trillion, which is the Department of Defense's annual budget, basically 10 times the entire net worth of the richest person in the world every year. But one wonders if the budget could have been more wisely spent elsewhere. For example, according to today's military.com, the U.S. Armed Forces Tuition Assistance Program pays for up to 100% of the cost of tuition or expenses, up to a maximum of $250 per credit, and a personal maximum of $4,500 per fiscal year per student. Wait, so the military only pays for $4,500 of your student fees, and then you have to go into the military? Assuming a 4-year college course, Stargate funds could have supported over 2,000 service personnel in studying actual science rather than cleaning conduits linked to the Matrix and Cognitrons. Instead, Stargate and its predecessors only employed a total of 40 employees, of which some, 23, were remote viewers. This leads me to the first of two elephants in the room staring at me from opposite corners. So, what did these remote viewers achieve in terms of intelligence collection? As I mentioned earlier, the AIR produced an extensive report on the effectiveness of viewers in the testing environment. But assessing the accuracy of their vision in an operational setting is far more difficult. For two main reasons. First, these viewers were asked to participate in operations whose details are largely classified. Sure, the CIA released some 12 million pages worth of documents following a Freedom of Information Act request. 12 million pages. That's got to be like a warehouse full of paper, right? Though I examined some of the most famous assignments, and even in those cases, large portions of the files have been redacted. It's like there's people at the CIA just going through with pens and crossing out 12 million pages of documents because someone had a FOIA request. Second, the details about certain assignments were publicly disclosed after the closure of Stargate. But in those cases, the narrative of events was owned by members or proponents of the program who had a vested interest in portraying the remote viewing experience as successes. Reputable news outlets picked up on those stories, sometimes muddling important details. So let's kick off with some apparent successes reported by Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff. As a reminder, these two parapsychologists had been the lead investigators at Stanford Research Institute during the early CIA program in the first half of the 70s. Remote viewers working for the two were apparently able to correctly describe three top secret installations after their monitors had provided them with a set of coordinates. On the first occasion, two psychics gave detailed accounts of an underground secret facility in Western Virginia, even naming code words and personnel active at the site. This was the secret government bunker under the Greenbrier Resort, designed as an emergency hideout for Congress in case of a nuclear attack. The existence of the bunker was revealed only in 1992. The two also alleged that two of the psychics were able to identify a similar installation in the Ural mountain range, a bunker used by the Soviet government. In 1974, a viewer provided a description of a Soviet airfield, which included a version of a large gantry crane. The site turned out to be the nuclear testing area of, I'm not even going to try to say that, Polinsky, something like that. I gotta love those Russian names. However, a shadow of doubt was cast on these apparent successes. The vision of the Greenbrier bunker was suspected of being the result of an internal leak, and the Russian nuclear testing report was severely criticized by a CIA analyst, saying, quote, "The remote viewing of the site by subject S1 proved to be unsuccessful. The only positive evidence of the rail-mounted gantry crane was far outweighed by the large amount of negative evidence noted in the body of the analysis." Based on later analysis of several remote viewing reports, it appears that the psychics may have been influenced by the leading questions posed by their monitors, as well as by their own operational knowledge of the matter at hand. In other words, if you're an Army veteran with good knowledge of Soviet military installations, and you're sitting opposite a monitor who's asking strongly suggestive questions, you're likely to get at least one detail right, even if you don't possess paranormal activities. Allow me to return to our intro to assess the accuracy of remote viewing operative Joe McGonigal. To recap, U.S. General Dozier had been held prisoner by the Italian Red Brigades, while the psychic had allegedly located the site of his captivity. In later accounts of the event, the psychic stated that he had identified the northern Italian city of Padua as the location of the general. His reports were forwarded to Italian authorities on January 20th and 26th, 1982. On January 28th, a special operations squad of the Italian police burst into an apartment in Padua and beat the living crap out of the terrorist cell, rescuing the general just when he was about to be executed. The only reported victim of the raid was the terrorist's house cat. His name has not been recorded, but given his own owner's political inclinations, I'm going to guess it was Chairman Meow. It turns out that the Italian police had been flooded with tip-offs by local psychics, and so decided to ignore the American viewer. They simply had done their job, busting the Red Brigade support network and offering lenient sentences in exchange for information. Nonetheless, one might argue that McGonigal, again, apologies for butchering his name, had been proven right, but not so fast. I wouldn't argue that. Well, he was in the right place. A CIA file on the case states that run-of-the-mill analysis based on their knowledge of the Red Brigade's modus operandi had already ventured that the general may be held in a city 1.5 hours drive from Verona, the place of the kidnapping. And the city of Padua, if I'm saying that right, fits the bill. After the general returned to safety in the U.S., a meeting was arranged between him and the psychic to ascertain whether the psychic's visions had been accurate. The minutes of their encounter had been declassified by the CIA, but the general's reaction has been redacted. So we'll never know if his comments were astonishing, your cognitions are truly connected to the Matrix, or you stupid fool, why were you meditating in Maryland? I was kept chained for 42 days. Another case which made it to the headlines was the manhunt for Charles Frank Jordan. And for the next segment, I must thank author Joe Nickell, who wrote a comprehensive analysis of the event for Skeptical Inquirer in 2001. Excuse me. So, back in 1989, the Drug Enforcement Administration sought the help of Project Sunstreak, as it was known back then, to locate Charles Jordan. The customs agent with the DEA had been taking bribes from drug runners. Once he learned he was being investigated, Jordan fled, evading law enforcement and America's Most Wanted for a good 2 years. I feel like that's kind of risky. Like, if you work for the DEA and you're taking bribes, you're going to end up in scary prison with all the gang and gang members that you put in prison. And they're going to be like, what did you do? I took bribes. And then they'll be like, well, you're going to be murdered before breakfast. The fugitive was eventually arrested in Wyoming, and it appears that a Sunstreak operative was instrumental in securing Jordan's capture, at least according to a version reported by the Washington Post on December 30th, 1996. A November 1998 BBC documentary also covered this case, stating that Jordan was arrested in northwest Wyoming, some 100 miles from a town called Lovell, next to a Native American burial ground. Another account of the event comes from Dale Graff, former project director with Sunstreak, and author of the book Tracks in the Psychic Wilderness. In the book, Graff states that one of the remote viewers, quote, narrowed down Jordan's location in northern Wyoming near a campground. Although our data was not acted upon, the fugitive was captured a few weeks later at a campground in northern Wyoming. This data was totally contrary to the DEA's expectations. They believed he was hiding somewhere in the Caribbean region. In a later work published in 2000, Graff wrote a slightly different version of the psychic's account stating, quote, he is in Wyoming, near a place that sounds like, lol, there's an Indian burial place nearby. This kind of sounds like adjusting things after the fact, doesn't it? You might have already noticed some discrepancies in these versions. The Washington Post writes that the psychic was instrumental in capturing Jordan, while Graff states that the Sunstreak report was not acted upon. But there's more. The BBC and Dale Graff mention northern Wyoming as the location of the arrest. But in reality, Charles Jordan was eventually caught in southern Wyoming. Graff also mentions that law enforcement was looking for the corrupt official in the Caribbean. But the truth is that Colorado State Police had already found Jordan's car just outside of Denver, some days before his capture. The car was located on an interstate road leading to Wyoming, which had prompted officers to look in that direction. And one last observation. Graff mentions the town of Lovell and the Indian burial place only 2 years after these details were included in the documentary. Joe Nickell and the Skeptical Inquirer identified the Sunstreak viewer as Angela Della Fiora, previously a civilian analyst with INSCOM, the Army's Intelligence and Security Command. Della Fiora did not follow the standard remote viewing technique codified by Puthoff and Targ, and preferred to rely on spirit communication. She would fall into a trance during which she channeled one of three entities: George, Dr. Einstein, why can I not say his name right? Einstein, or Maurice. The CIA paid for this. One of the three would take control of her body and reply to the monitor's questions via the technique of automatic writing. Della Fiora had previously worked on the search for Lieutenant Colonel William Higgins, kidnapped in Lebanon in February 1988 by a terrorist cell associated with Hezbollah. Della reported that Higgins was alive and soon to be released. On July 18th, 1989, all the terrorists released was a video showing Higgins' death by hanging. Joe, as you might expect, raised doubts on Della's revelations via automatic writing. First of all, besides Graff's 2000 book, other publications stated that she had almost guessed the location of Charlie Jordan by writing a word similar to LOL, low, or even low. But all these accounts were published at least 10 years after Jordan's arrest in Lovell and were already common knowledge. Second, Nickel reports how Della Fiora's own colleagues within Sunstreak doubted her abilities and that she was, quote, too often and inadvertently coached towards targets by her customers' questions and answers. The conclusion to this rather confusing example is that it's not possible to ascertain whether remote viewers' contributions were actually accurate or useful, as tale of their successes are too often A, circulated years after events had taken place, or B, compiled by individuals with a vested interest in deferring the program or defending the program, or C, not corroborated by primary sources, which are often classified or redacted. To evaluate the accuracy and operational effectiveness of remote viewing, it's better to rely on an academic review of a large number of experiments, allowing us to establish the presence or not of statistical significance. So it's time to circle back to the analysis commissioned by the CIA in 95 and conducted by AIR. Earlier, I hinted at the fact that AIR had involved two academics in the review, a statistician and a psychologist. What I did not specify is that their quest for a balanced view pitted against each other a believer in paranormal powers versus a skeptic. So let's consider the non-skeptical assessment first. This was compiled by Professor of Statistics Dr. Jessica Utz, published with the title An Assessment of the Evidence for Psychic Functioning. Dr. Utz focused on research conducted by the SAIC laboratory, the private firm contracted in 91 by the DIA. The statistician noted how SAIC performed some investigation on anomalous perturbation, also known as telekinesis, but the bulk of their efforts were directed at anomalous cognition, another term for remote viewing. By analyzing test results, Dr. Utz conducted that 1. Anomalous cognition is to some extent possible in the general population. However, certain individuals seem to be more gifted than others. She singled out a subject identified as viewer 372, who is particularly proficient at describing technical sites. Look, if you've got 372 viewers doing loads of remote viewing, at some point they're going to get it bang on. It's just like, you give enough monkeys typewriters and eventually you're going to get Shakespeare. It's just how math works. She also concluded that training was nonetheless required for remote viewing to be accurate. She admitted that this technique was, quote, rarely 100% accurate, and there is no reliable way to learn what is accurate and what is not. But the same levels of inaccuracy were true for the traditional sources used for intelligence gathering. In all, her review was largely positive. But you're also ignoring the leading questions and all that malarkey that was going on. As a next step, the statistician recommended not to invest valuable resources in finding proof of remote viewing's effectiveness. She recommended instead to continue research to understand how this capability actually works. Now, let's look at the skeptic response. This was performed by Professor of Psychology Dr. Ray Hyman, published on September 11th, 1995, with the title Evaluation of Program on Anomalous Mental Phenomena. Dr. Hyman admitted that the results provided by SAIC in Dr. Utz's analysis were enticing. However, he also pointed out two methodological flaws. One, all SAIC tests shared the same judge, a program led by Edwin May. May was also the principal investigator, which raises questions as to the impartiality of the results and interpretation. 2. Dr. Hyman admitted that the statistical results were far beyond what is expected by chance. But this did not prove that remote viewing abilities were responsible. So, allow me to clarify this point. If I were to plan his next rant or tangent, I may use my alleged enormous cognition powers to try and guess certain words or phrases he may use. Dr. Hyman posits that in order to detect the presence of anomalous cognition, a researcher should eliminate all other possibilities, all other influencing factors. Dr. Hyman included that he did not believe that. Quote, contemporary findings of parapsychology, including those from the SRI SAIC program, justify concluding that anomalous mental phenomena have been proven. Now, these could be definitely proven only if the SAIC experiments were to be carried out without influencing factors, with the allocation of independent judges. But even in that case, quote, this does not guarantee the ability would have useful applications. I care about useful applications, but I'm way more interested in like, is this actually possible? Is this actually a thing that people can do? And they haven't even got that far. Hyman proceeded to quote Edwin May himself, who stated that AIR that only 20% of intelligence provided by a remote viewer were accurate and actionable. Moreover, it is not possible to discern which 20% of the information is the accurate one. This implies that remote viewing reports need to be complemented by human or signal intelligence gathered through traditional methods. Now, if an intelligence analyst has to invest resources in traditional methods, why rely on psychics in the first place? After having reviewed the diverging opinions of Utz and Hyman, the AIR panel presented their conclusions. They concluded that the SAIC lab research identified a statistically significant anomaly, but the nature and source of this anomaly could not be ascertained. Moreover, there was no evidence that anomalous cognition could, quote, prove useful in intelligence gathering information. Information collected with this method was deemed to be, one, vague, two, inconsistent, and three, dispersed with large amounts of irrelevant and erroneous details. And here's the final nail in the coffin. To quote, in no case had the information provided ever been used to guide intelligence operations. Thus, remote viewing failed to produce actionable intelligence. As mentioned earlier, this AIR report finally convinced the CIA to get rid of Stargate for good. But I find it pleasantly refreshing that the world of academia did not dismiss outright the idea of remote viewing, but took a rigorous, scientific, and open minded approach to prove or disprove its existence. I think it's a bit of a waste of money because I think personally it's nonsense, but the reason I'm able to draw these conclusions about it being nonsense is because academia has been there and done that years ago. The conclusion of AIR does not simply brand paranormal capabilities as outright hokum, but focuses instead on observable results and the methodology of the research. So, to reiterate their verdict, they admitted that further, more rigorous research may be needed, but the operational results obtained thus far did not warrant further investment. I very much hope that a similar combination of rigor, open-mindedness, and respectful dialogue would be applied by both sides to all future discussions between believers and skeptics. Wouldn't that be nice? Like, I'm always open to having my mind changed. It'd be cool if someone was like, bro, ghosts are real. And I'd be like, show me. And then they show me and be like, God damn, dude, ghosts are real. It's not going to happen. I don't think, but it's interesting. I'm open to that. Early on, I mentioned my room was crowded by two elephants. One being the accuracy of remote viewers, and the second deals with the events that kicked off the CIA's paranormal projects back in the 1970s. The reports that the Soviets had been investigating the application of psychotronics to intelligence and military work. Is this because it's fake? They just set it up so the American government wastes tons of money on it and it distracts them from doing actual work. I must admit that I'd actually initially laughed off this claim as a result of clever Soviet disinformation. Surely a Marxist-Leninist government would not invest in such activities, right? Well, I've been served a hefty slice of humble pie by Serge Kernbach, a researcher at Cybertronica Research, a center of advanced robotics and environmental science, and an offshoot of the University of Stuttgart in Germany. The pie came wrapped in Kernbach's paper, Unconventional Research in USSR and Russia, which provides an overview of paranormal activities actually conducted and funded by the Soviet Union. It appears that the Soviet government was prompted to fund paranormal research in the 50s and 60s following the acquisition of the Nerbe archives during World War II. It was an organization within the SS initially tasked with researching the origins of the Aryan race, but it later evolved into other sinister endeavors such as performing medical experiments without anesthesia or allegedly delving into cult research. So there you go. We managed to get through more than 5,000 words without mentioning the Nazis, but here they are, popping up at the end. The paper casts more doubt on this origin story as it seems the Soviet leaders were interested in unconventional research since the 20s. Still, in the 50s and 60s, the research received a considerable boost, focusing on three branches. 1. Parapsychological experiments in the field of remote viewing. 2. The influence of electromagnetic fields on biological subjects. And 3. The possibility of physical manipulation with bioradiation, which involved both telekinesis and telepathy. The latter research was led by Professor Chaletsky, who interestingly concluded that his experiments, quote, do not leave us in doubt about the presence of radiation emanating from the human body. While radiation emanates from everything, Professor, all fields must have been considered promising enough. In 1973, the Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, P.N. Dmitriev, established a special commission to investigate psychic phenomena. The commissioner's conclusions was, quote, we were able to articulate and to defend a principal point. The phenomenon exists. The communication channel is unknown. The affecting channel is unknown. In other words, we believe that psychic phenomena exist. We just don't know how. I won't go into the details of the Soviet research in this field, nor attempt to decode it. I just want to point out a curious occurrence noted by Kernbach. The author of the paper states that Soviet Minister of Defense Arya Mlanovsky in 1960 received reports documenting U.S. attempts to weaponize telepathy. The publications appear to be unreliable and probably fake. However, they may have contributed to provide additional momentum to Soviet research, which in turn inspired the Americans to do the same, and so on. It's just a building circle of nonsense. And that's where we end today's episode. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy the show, do leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Or if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/LarryMLease. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.